Welcome back, ladies and brave gentlemen. My name is Tiffany Dawn, and James is back with me today. Some of you have been asking where he is. In fact, one person commented, has James even been able to get in the bathroom yet, poor guy? Thankfully, we have more than one bathroom, because otherwise, with these last 2 weeks of my pregnancy, how much I pee, he would never make it in the bathroom. So we have a really awesome Okay, we're just gonna read the question because this topic is a tough one, but it's like such a good one.
Yeah, so this is someone, a DM from one of you. Since you love talking about sex, I would love to learn more about the thought life of sex. What's the difference between sexual desire and lust? Is it okay to think about a crush / boyfriend / fiance? I realize there's a big difference between them sexually. Just centered around wanting to honor God, be pure in thought, motive, and heart, but also not unnecessarily feeling guilty for things that are natural.
So when we think about lust, I think the big verse that we look at is in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus is saying, whether or not you've ever committed adultery physically, if you've even lusted after someone, you've committed adultery in your heart. And I think sometimes we take that as just like, oh my goodness, like I'm so uptight all the time. Is this lust? Is this natural sexual desire? Like, what is this? But I think the intent of that passage was actually to level the playing field. Like, that was a culture that was really led religiously by the Pharisees. And they were like, I've done it all right. I have it all together. And Jesus is like, no, you don't.
That verse in Matthew is really a message for the self-righteous and a message for people who say, you know what? I've never committed adultery. I'm good. I have kept that commandment. Jesus says, no, everyone has broken all of the commandments. That's, to me, is the general gist of that part of the Sermon on the Mount, because he's talking about hatred and murder. And the point is, you've broken all the commandments. And I think something that's confusing, in English, it says, if you have looked at a woman with lust in your heart. And so then all of us who are trying to honor God think, oh no, I noticed someone who was attracted. When I looked at that person, was that lustfully? And I think that's the thing we want to talk about.
Because there really is this continuum from like sexual desire to lust. Like, it's all, I don't know, it seems to me all kind of like interconnected sometimes, but it's so natural in how God made us to have sexual desire. And I think sometimes the shame of thinking, is this lust, is this not, it does more harm than good and is more toxic than even having a lustful thought occasionally. Is that bad to say?
Well, I mean, the reality is that all of us will have lustful thoughts. And we're never going to get to a point in our life where we're like, yep, we have conquered lustful thoughts. We're never going to have them again. We can no longer be living in sin, which is great, but we're not going to be perfect until we get to heaven. So I know something that was really helpful for me. I remember going to a Bible study that was led by an older pastor, one of our friends' grandfathers even. And he said, you know, it's not lust when you look at a girl and you think, wow, that girl is attractive. He may have even said, you're admiring God's creation. But, you know, I've found that it's much more about, you notice someone who's attractive. What are you then doing with that in your mind? When you start to have sexual thoughts about this person, which is a lot of times a person you don't have a relationship with. It's someone you're observing from afar. And you start not only seeing that picture in your mind, you start to have sexual thoughts about that image or about that person. And I'm not talking about dreams, because you can't really control your dreams, but you're daydreaming in a sexual way. In that case, I think you want to examine your heart, and I think you want to take those thoughts to God and say, God, as you know, this is what I'm doing. You know, I'd like to think this is just me, but I know that you know what's going on. So what should I do with this?
I remember, like, when I was younger, I was a teenager, I would daydream every day about my crushes, just that they were like holding me or like holding my hand or whatever. And you might say, oh, those are very innocent daydreams. People's clothes were on in them, so you're fine. But I felt very racked with guilt every day for years about those daydreams. I felt like this is lust. This must be lust. This must be wrong. And I never told anybody about it. And I just felt so much guilt, and like I just couldn't stop doing it. And looking back, I think the shame and the guilt were far more toxic than the daydreams themselves.
Probably true.
But I wish I had actually, I guess, talked about it.
I think you wished you had been more open with your community that you were having those thoughts. I think that could have really allowed you to process them and clarify what you were going through and dealing with. And
at the same time, I can't imagine going back to that Tiffany and actually sharing those thoughts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you had that sort of veneer of righteousness that you were...
True, trying to uphold. And also I didn't think my community would understand. I think now I have people in my life who I would feel comfortable sharing any of that with. But at the time, I don't know that I did. Yeah, but I think that the shame of it was far worse than the thoughts themselves. So I'm not saying like you should go around lusting after people, but I think we have to take some of the shame off of this topic and say like it's a very fine line. Like sexual desire is normal and you don't want to feel shame for that. You don't want to feel guilty for that. And like if you're dating someone and you want to go further with them physically, that is 100% normal.
That's true.
I remember like when we were engaged, like wanting to daydream sometimes about like going further physically. And for the most part, I would stop myself, but sometimes I did. And I would feel a lot of guilt afterwards, but also like, this guy's going to be my husband soon. I don't know how to process this. And I'm thankful for that sexual desire because that's like a beautiful thing in our marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of the way that God made all of us is having sexual desires. If you're not married, you're still a sexual being. And so I think you have to talk to God and talk to your community about what is a healthy way for me to acknowledge my sexuality, my sexual desires, but also to honor God. And the Bible doesn't give specific rules for how to do that. I think the most important thing is to really acknowledge what you are feeling and what you are thinking and take it to God.
And to people you trust.
Yeah.
So where does sexual desire cross into lust? I don't even know that I have a black and white answer for you guys. Some people might say when you're picturing people with their clothes off. Some people might say when you're picturing having sex with someone. It's probably a lot of it the matter of where your heart is. But I think that a lot of times that's how God works on purpose. Because I think a lot of times he wants to draw us closer to himself through the process of saying, God, what do I do with this?
If there was a clear written guideline, you wouldn't need to go to God and say, God, help. And the process of going to God and saying, God, help, brings you closer to him, which is what he wants.
So don't let shame get in your way, but keep trying to honor God. I think it's a fine line, delicate balance and tension to live in, but that's normal. So I love you, ladies and brave gentlemen. Thanks for joining us, and leave your thoughts down below too on this question. Bye, guys.